Welcome to episode 6 of the Bozi Breakdown. We're digging into a new pit stop record today, excitement in Michigan, and why there are going to be a bunch of changes in Mexico City. Let's get into it. So let's start off the episode going back to Charlotte Motor Speedway, where the number 11 Joe Gibbs Racing pit crew of Denny Hamlin set a new pit stop record at 8.02 seconds. So now Cup Series pit crews are just mere hundredths away from being into the 7-second range, which is wild, but also matches up to what I predicted on Actions Detrimental earlier this year. That number 11 pit crew has been kind of the top crew in the series for a lot of the season, and the rankings have fluctuated back and forth, but overall, they've just been on top of their game. And you have, of course, we talked about Joel Boignon, who is the jackman, and he's gotten a lot of attention earlier this year. Then you have front tire changer Austin Maloney, who's really brand new. Devin Euchre, who's the rear tire changer. He's also fairly young. And then you have Kenneth Purcell, who's a veteran of the sport, multiple championships, multiple race wins. He's just been all over the place, and he's just one of the best fuelers in the sport. And of course, we have tire carrier Dylan Dowell. So he's also a veteran champion. He's been around, been at Penske, been at Joe Gibbs, and he was also the point of attention this week at Michigan because of how he caught a fuel can when Denny departed a pit stall before he was supposed to. So during the race at Michigan, at one point in the race, Hamlin was told, hey, we're going to wait to go until we're full. But he decided he didn't really want to do that. He wanted to go immediately. So Kenneth was still plugged into the car. And Dylan, fortunately, was done with his job. And as part of his training, he was watching what was happening in the stop. And as Hamlin took off before he was supposed to, Kenneth was still plugged into the car. So it started dragging the fuel can forward. Fortunately, he was able to pull it out of the car, but it fell to the ground. At which point, Dylan acted kind of as defense to keep the can in the box to prevent them from getting a penalty. This was fortunate for them because they were able to get out. And even though Hamlin made kind of his own decision on what he wanted to do, they were still able to proceed with the race without penalty. That move that Dylan performed is a practiced move. So most of the Cup Series pit crews now will practice all kinds of contingencies. And that move is typically practiced for races like super speedways where they're doing a lot of fuel-only stops where the tire carrier doesn't really need to do his primary duty. So at that point, he's watching the fuel can, watching anything else on the car that he can really service just in case it needs his help. And in this situation, it ended up working out. That part of the training comes from the coaching staff at Joe Gibbs Racing. And as Dylan Dowell mentioned on Stacking Pennies earlier this week, that is a move from Brian Holland. So Brian Holland is a pit crew coach at Joe Gibbs Racing. He is also a former pit crew member. So he's been around for a while, and he's really one of the best in the series just based on the results and crew members that come out of his camp. So Holland was around in the past, I think, as a changer for Hendrick. He was a changer at Red Bull before becoming a coach at Penske and eventually making his way to Joe Gibbs Racing. Dowell kind of followed a similar path because Dowell started his career at Penske, where he won a bunch of races, won a championship with Joey Logano, and then eventually ended up at Joe Gibbs Racing. So they've been around each other for quite a while, so it's not surprising that Dylan's able to pick some of this stuff up very quickly. So it was cool to see some of that action and some of those contingencies at play, because a lot of the stuff that gets practiced week to week for pit stops never makes it to the race because it's usually just not necessary. Speaking on Hamlin and some of his pit stops, one of the things I noticed on the last pit stop of the race is that they actually had a hiccup. So if you watch the replay of the pit stop on TV, you'll see all of the crew members finish on the right side of the car, and they'll come back around to the left, and you'll see Joel jack up the car and hang the tire in the rear. But you'll notice that he stops because he misses the pins. So what that means is that the wheel did not get fully seated, which means that the tire changer cannot go back on with the wheel nut. And what Joel did there, first saved them from having a loose wheel because he stopped, and instead of turning around to drop the car, he re-indexed the wheel. So he tweaked it a little bit so it fit back where it needs to be so that Devin could tighten the wheel properly. But which is a great move, and it shows just how highly they're operating, that within those hundredths of a second he had the reaction of, hey, we need to do this. Obviously Joel was disappointed, if you watched after the pit stop, because they had a slightly slow stop. But one thing that I did notice is that Kenneth was plugged in for a little while longer while they were fixing that. So while those hundredths of a second, or maybe a tenth, or however long it takes to fix those things, may not make a huge difference from a fuel perspective, it is very likely that they were able to flow a little extra fuel in. So the pit stop mistake that got fixed might have also helped them make it to the end on fuel, because Kenneth was plugged in for just that much longer while the car was up in the air. So it's interesting to see how sometimes secondary effects of doing things to prevent errors can also occasionally work out, where you end up with a little bit of extra fuel so you can make it to the end. Now that we are done with Michigan, there is going to be a lot of stuff happening in Mexico City. And the first thing that a lot of people will notice is that there are opposite direction pit stops. So what that means is at tracks, most of the season, the cars are coming counterclockwise. So if you're standing on pit lane, the cars are coming from your right side and exiting out of your left. But at Mexico City and some of the other road courses like Watkins Glen, the cars go clockwise, so they come in from the left and exit to the right. And what that means is that everybody will have slightly different actions. So the cars are flipped. Now, there are options for teams to go a couple of different ways. They can obviously send everybody around and keep them in their positions, but the reality is, if you want to keep the same motions, you want to swap your front tire changer and rear tire changer. So they'll be in the same position. So what you're realistically doing is just keeping the same pit stop to an extent, but flipping the car around. In addition to the tire changer locations, the fueler is also in a different location, because the fuel inlet is swapped to the other car. So typically, if you're standing on pit wall, the car will be facing to your left, the fueler will be on your far right, but at these types of road courses, the car is facing to your right and the fueler will be on your far left. So what that means is you have to figure out how to tweak your choreography, and here there will be a bunch of different approaches depending on the team, and we'll likely see some stuff that's maybe even slightly different than what we saw last year. There are a few different ways that teams approach things late last year at Watkins Glen, but most decided to make their front tire changer their rear tire changer. So that means that the person standing at the far left of pit wall is still going to be the same person, but they're going to be servicing a different portion of the car. And the same deal for the person standing at the far right of pit wall, still going to be the same person, but they're going to be servicing a different end of the car. And what that allows is for these tire changers to keep the same motions, where they're running around the car in the directions that they typically do, and then returning in the same fashion. The only change for them will be that now one of them will be waiting for a car, and now another one of them will be coming out earlier. Where the other differences come is how the jackmen and tire changers move around the car. So typically you'll have all of them coming around the front of the car, which will be the left side if you're on ovals, and then coming back around the same way while the rear tire changer runs around. Here, there are a couple of different options because of the way the cars are coming in. They'll be obviously coming around the front of the car, but now if they go back, they would be burning a lot of time and be in the way of the car. So what they're going to do is a lot of them will split that. And you also have to consider that there's going to be a fueler on the back of the car. So if there's multiple people coming that way, you could end up in a traffic jam. What we've seen in previous years with the Gen 7 car is that some will split their tire changers, tire carriers, and jackmen. So what will happen is as the car comes in, you'll have everybody run around the front, and then once the pit stop starts happening, the tire carrier will have a different approach because they'll be coming around the front. So that means they'll have to go set a tire at the back of the car for the jackman to hang, and then step backwards to be able to hang the front tire. At that point, the tire carrier for most of the teams is going to run actually behind the car. So at ovals, the tire carrier runs around the front and returns, but here for most of the teams, the tire carrier is going to run around the front and then basically make a full circle around the car by running around the back. At that point, they need to time it perfectly, so if the fueler is exchanging cans, it's that point where they come across because you'll have the rear tire changer and the tire carrier running around. The jackman, for most of the teams last year, would go back around the front. So what you're going to have is everybody running around the front. The jackman is going to follow the tire carrier, jack the car, wait for the tire carrier to drop the tire behind them, hang that tire, drop the car, and then come back around and be not in the way of the front tire changer. But there are a few other options, because some of the teams, what they ended up doing is they would send everybody around the front, they would jack up the car, service that left side of the car, and then the jackman and tire carrier would run around the back. But you have to really time that well, because the fueler needs to either be unplugged or needs to be angled in such a way that you can have a jackman, a tire carrier, and the rear tire changer all run around him, which can make things complex. So there's going to be a lot of stuff to watch here, because it'll be a very atypical race. And obviously these pit crews haven't been here before, so they're going to have to adapt to whatever pit wall differences there are, the pit stall sizes. There's a lot to see, and I think it's going to make pit lane very exciting. I believe that first round of pit stops is going to bring out some new interesting things we probably haven't seen, but there's also a high potential for mistakes just because they're changing so many things. So there are a handful of teams that have already listed their rosters in this fashion, where they've swapped the front tire changers and rear tire changers. It's mostly the Hendrick teams. The rest of the teams haven't listed theirs, but my assumption is that they're just submitting their rosters just as they usually do. And I expect all or most of the teams to swap their front tire changers and rear tire changers. So I suggest watching those pit stops very closely, because it'll be different than what you see any other week. Speaking of roster changes, we have a couple of changes this week, with TJ Semke, who's the jackman for the number 9 of Chase Elliott, out for the week. My understanding is that he's on baby watch and obviously wants to stay home for that. So what's happened there is that Hendrick has pulled Brendan Johnson from the number 7 of Justin Haley and placed him on the number 9 of Chase Elliott. Brendan Johnson is probably familiar, especially to Hendrick fans, because he's been a jackman for Kyle Larson before getting moved to the number 7 of Spire, of Justin Haley at Spire. And the reason that he's being pulled from that number 7 is because Spire leases pit crews from Hendrick Motorsports. So Hendrick uses those guys as backup whenever they need to fill in a spot on their primary crew. Number 7 fans shouldn't be too worried, because Hendrick is providing Keon Johnson, who is a backup development jackman for the Hendrick teams, and he's been around for a little while. He's gotten some cup experience, so he was on the number 40 car of Justin Allgaier earlier this year at Daytona, and I believe he's done some races with the number 78 at Live Fast, so he should be pretty decent there. But those are really the only pit crew changes that I saw on the roster so far for this week. So everything else should be pretty smooth, and I don't anticipate huge issues for that number 9, because this is a decent week if you need to swap people out, because there will be so much chaos on pit lane. And because, like most road courses, the fuel timing is usually not as highly important as some of the ovals, where you're just trying to chase track position as much as possible. With that in mind, this race is going to be very unpredictable, not only on pit lane, but with how the cars race. So the elevation in Mexico City at the track is 7,500 feet, which means that the air is very thin. So that not only has an impact on drivers and pit crew members, but it also has an impact on the cars. As the air gets thinner, it makes it harder to cool things on the car, because there's just a less quantity of it moving over all the coolers. So NASCAR has allowed teams to carry spare radiator louvers or outlets to test in practice, and then each OEM is going to have to decide whether they want to run their standard louvers or these more open louvers. And what that means is that with the standard louvers, with them being partially closed, it allows the cars to make downforce, but at the expense of less airflow through the radiator. With the open louvers, they'll get more airflow, which will keep the cars cooler, but it will make them lose downforce. And that's going to be a big dilemma here, because the thin air not only impacts the cooling of the car, it also impacts the downforce. So as you get higher in elevation, you lose downforce on a car, and you also lose drag. So there's a little bit of everything along with losing power. So there's a huge impact on all the systems of the car, all the elements, but the good news is that it kind of impacts things equally. It's just now a question of how it's all going to balance out in the end. My prediction is that while the cars will be down on power because of the elevation, the reduced downforce and the reduced drag should still allow them to make good speed, especially in the straights. So I think we'll see an exciting race here, and I think we'll see some of the skill sets really come out, especially with the loss of downforce, because drivers might have to handle the cars a bit more than we've seen at other tracks. It'll be exciting in general just to see teams race at Mexico City. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the cars handle and how the pit crews adapt to a brand new pit lane and obviously pit stops that they only do a handful of times per year. It should bring a lot of excitement, and it should bring some interesting racing. In addition to the Cup Series, the Xfinity Series is obviously racing there. I think those teams will be a little bit more equipped to handle it just because that style of car has raced at that elevation in the past. So I'm sure they have a little more data, but the pit stops will again be the same scenario where you'll have front tire changers and rear tire changers swapping around. You'll have split strategies of whether you want to send your jackmen around the front of the car or around the back of the car. Same deal with the tire carrier, how you want the tire carrier out there. So there's a lot of excitement that I think we'll see there as both of the races progress. I'm going to try to keep up with these, try to get it on a more sequential level from week to week, but it's a lot of it is just getting around the rest of my gigs and obviously my own pit crew work in IMSA. So hopefully I'll have a follow-up episode right after Mexico City. But in the meantime, I just wanted to thank you guys for leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts, leaving your comments on YouTube. I really enjoyed seeing some of the latest reviews. We have Wikes U 2011 said on Apple Podcasts, this is a great resource for fans who want to hear more about the technical aspects of the cars, pits, and the sport. Keep it going, Bozi. I really appreciate that. We also have Mike Kelly Inc. on Apple Podcasts, and Mike Kelly wrote a long paragraph, but he basically said it's about time we have a 301 level podcast. It's remarkable it took this long to find this podcast, but better late than never. Saying that Mike Kelly really enjoys the detailed explanations and graphics if you're following along on YouTube, and I do appreciate that. If you're watching this on YouTube, I always try to throw in some graphics, throw in some visuals to help add to what's going on there. So I appreciate everybody sharing, and if you can, please leave questions in the YouTube comments. I will use that to answer things on the next episode, and as always, any 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify are appreciated. Thanks for coming along, and I'll talk to you guys soon.